Welcome to IES Abroad Advancement and Alumni Engagement's latest featured virtual alumni event, live from Vienna with mezzo-soprano Kate Lindsey, who we are proud to claim as an alumna of the IES Vienna program. My name is Jody Madler, and I am the Executive Director of IES Advancement and Alumni Engagement. On behalf of my IES Alumni Engagement colleagues, we are so glad you could join us in our virtual event series, which aims to provide moments of connection, learning, and joy. Our event today, we know, will fulfill this purpose and more. It is now my honor to introduce you to Vienna Director, Dr. Morten Solvik, an international scholar. Dr. Solvik holds a PhD in musicology from the University of Pennsylvania and a BA in music and intellectual history from Cornell University. In addition to his work with IES Abroad Vienna, Dr. Solvik is an active scholar with internationally recognized expertise on Gustav Mahler. We are so proud to have Kate and Morten join us today, and welcome you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody. And welcome everyone to Palais Corbelli in Vienna. Some of you are alumni from this program, and I'm sure you recognize the scenery here in our lovely palace. We're very, very lucky, of course, to be here. And I'm very lucky to be here with Kate Lindsey, who was here almost exactly 20 years ago. Is that right?
Exactly 20 years ago.
Exactly 20 years ago, as a music student from IU. You came here to attend our program. And wow, things have certainly developed. Did you think 20 years ago you'd be sitting here having this conversation with me?
No.
As you head off to work at the opera?
No, not in my wildest dreams. Not in my wildest dreams. It was probably the most formative semester of university, because as a music student, here we were in Vienna, and we could see music everywhere, any night. Incredible artists. It completely changed my perspective on what it could be.
I've taught here music for many years, and I have an introductory lecture at the beginning of the semester where I tell my music students, you're not going to feel strange anymore. You're in a place where music is lived and breathed and celebrated in a way you won't find anywhere else. And of course, you went through that too, didn't you?
Yeah, I was really taken aback, actually, as to the manner in which culture is a part of life here. It is a part of people's lives. You finish work, you go see something. It is really integrated into people's routines, way of being. It's what people talk about, and even 20 years later, it's incredible that it's valued in such a way. It's completely different from what we grow up with in the States. If you don't grow up in New York City or Boston, or some of these big cities, you just don't have that experience. And I think it's really eye-opening.
Yeah, and of course you couldn't have given us a better plug for the music program and for Vienna and for IES, in saying that we were instrumental, if I may use the pun, to get you off on your start. Of course, you've been now all around the world singing in major roles in major houses. Some of our alumni saw you in February of 2020 in Agrippina at the Met. And that was just, of course, before everything hit the wall. What did you end up doing during the pandemic?
Well, let's see. The pandemic hit in March, and I just had finished up at the Met in New York. And then I now live in England. I live in the UK now. And so my husband and son and I, we dashed back home in the middle of March. And then we sort of held tight for quite a while. And then after a few weeks of just trying to sort of get some rest and recalibrate and digest and grieve. I think I was grieving a lot as all the cancellations were coming in. Then I started to take time just to sing every day, just to sing for myself, just sit down when my son was napping. Thankfully, he still was getting a nap at that point. And I would just pick up music that I hadn't touched in a few years. And a lot of it, I started to just turn to Mozart, actually. Ironically enough, I just was picking up Mozart again and again and picking up all of those scores. And And I think one benefit to that time was that I remembered that I enjoy it just for the fact of being able to sit down and sing. It's not necessary for me. It's not so much about being on stage all the time and getting applause or anything like that. I really enjoy the process of singing, and I enjoy just how, I guess, probably how it makes me feel. It's like a therapy session, really. And I sort of returned to that because I think so often we get into our adult lives and it's one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and we're ticking things off the list. And so you're learning things in order to be ready for the next job. And during that period, I was just picking up things that I wanted to sing for the heck of it. And that was quite nice. And then started to try to find some creative ways to still make music when we couldn't do it for a public. So, you know, ironically, the sort of worst catastrophe hit, and we've all had to find ways through it, and it hasn't been easy, but I also think, well, goodness, we've made it through somehow, and that's something to be grateful for.
Did you end up doing any virtual performances? I mean, many people, many artists around the world turn to what we're doing today, is to reach across the miles, and ironically, in some cases, reach out in ways that other people weren't able to participate in.
Yeah.
Were you part of any virtual projects?
I did. I made a couple little videos just for social media. I didn't do a lot sort of self-directed virtual concerts. I think for me, what I struggle with is that the thing that I love about making music is being with people in a room and sharing in the moment when it happens. Because you can't recreate what it feels sort of like a spiritual experience. And that's what I've missed so much. Actually, last spring I was singing here, and finally the theaters opened up and I got to go see a friend sing at the Musikverein. And I just started to cry during the concert as the orchestra is playing, just thinking I've missed this so much. You can't get that necessarily from recordings. I've missed this communion of people together sharing in this experience that sort of can't be replicated. And so I missed that quite a lot, but I did end up doing projects. I had La Scala call in the middle of the winter last year saying we want to do a couple of pieces of Kurt Weill, and it will only be broadcast on TV. We already anticipate that. So I went and prepared that. So there were things like that happening in Europe, thankfully. And so there were some opportunities, but I wasn't doing as much sort of self-directed video concerts, things like that.
So you turned to Mozart in your absence from the stage. And speaking of Mozart, you're going to be appearing for the first time as Donna Elvira in Don Giovanni.
Yes.
Here in Vienna, which is why you're here, of course, yeah. for rehearsals. Have there been challenges in returning to the stage and to live performances, and sort of now you're back in it, but of course it's after a time of a real hiatus really from doing this? Yeah,
I think I had the experience of really returning to the stage with an audience last spring. We were quite lucky. I came to Vienna to do another production of l'Incoronazione di Poppea, the Incoronation of Poppea, and so I arrived last spring, actually in April, having no idea if we'd do the show for a public or just on video. We had no idea. We just started rehearsals and everything was still on lockdown. And then finally they announced that May 19th, Austria would reopen, and we opened on May 22nd. And so we got to have people in the house, spread out a bit, but people in the house. And that was quite emotional to have people there and hearing a response and hearing applause. And so it's been this gradual return to having more and more people. Now you don't have to space out so much. Everybody's together in the house. And that's a bigger that is a bigger change, and there was a sort of a psychological shift, I think, that was happening for a lot of artists coming back into the work. I think for a lot of us, we felt like there was something that had really sort of changed within us. Everyone was reevaluating, okay, what does this mean, and what does this mean when it does come back, and how, in a way, how do I, knowing what I know now, how do I approach art, music, sort of after this experience? It sort of can't be the same as it always was after what we've lived. And I think a lot of artists have been really examining that, and for some it's been even just an issue of stamina, like really having to build up stamina after such a long time away. So over at the Staatsoper, they were the intendant, the general manager, was saying people are just canceling all the time. They're canceling every night. But I think there's this return. We're building up our stamina again as well, and I think that's quite a process. And we're having to test all the time. You know, it's 3 times a week at least. And so we're living with this constant, oh no, there might be a positive case. Okay, now just the other night there was a positive case in some of the chorus for Carmen 2 nights ago, and literally 2 minutes before the performance, they had set up 2 different scores on the music stands for the orchestra. One that had cut out a lot of the chorus in case the chorus couldn't sing on stage. It was sort of like the greatest hits of Carmen, or the other, the regular version. And 2 minutes before the performance, they got all the negative PCR tests for the chorus, and they could do the full performance. But here, all the musicians have 2 options on the music stands in front of them, and that's what we're living in. I have to say to the Staatsoper, I really bow to them, because they are doing it. They're finding a way to keep going, which I have to be grateful for that, because there's a lot of people that would say, okay, we give up,
Yeah, well, you mentioned at the beginning how important art and music, and maybe even particularly the opera, is here. Of course, the Musikverein as well. So the value that society places on those cultural aspects also puts pressure on these institutions to produce, and of course that's what they're here for. That's what they want to do.
Yeah.
But you're now preparing Don Elvira, and we were talking a little bit about the production the other day. And you have a little bit of a luxury here in the time that you're spending in preparing the production. Tell us a little bit about the production stage before everybody sees you on stage, because of course that's as important, I think, as the actual delivery, right? Getting all of your colleagues lined up and where to stand on stage and how to think about the direction of the opera.
Yeah. So we, for a new production here, usually it's 5 to 6 weeks of rehearsal before we go up on stage. So we started, October 27th, we arrived and we got started. We also, the Staatsoper has an exterior sort of rehearsal space at Arsenal, which I never knew about, even when I studied here. It's over by the Belvedere, over in that area. And so we have this external space that offers a big sort of warehouse type of room, where we can actually work on the set. They've already produced that for us to work on it. So we've been hard at work for, about 3 weeks now, and I think we've got 3 more weeks to go to opening. And so we spend a few weeks in this exterior space, and then we move over to the Staatsoper when about 3 weeks into it. We've just moved over, and then today we finally got on stage for the first time. They've built the set, and we have to, it's funny how the set, but you move into a different space, and you move into the Staatsoper and you see all of the seats out there, all of this space out there, and it's really disconcerting. You're really in a different place. I felt so confused this morning about how to play this character when I felt this need to sort of look at this grand house out there. But now we're doing stage rehearsals in the morning, and then we go back and work on things at night. So it's a pretty intense schedule, actually. It's a very classic I think, sort of Austrian German schedule as well at the Opera House, where you work for 3 hours in the morning, you take 4 hours pause in the afternoon, and then you go back to work for another 3 hours in the evening rehearsing, and you know, and then in terms of music rehearsals, costume fittings, all of that, we're slowly piecing it together. And it's quite a process. There's a lot to think about, a lot to put together. But it's a good 5-6 weeks for a new production.
But this is a new production. So let's compare that with
Oh, no.
because Vienna is famous for not the new productions, but those that rotate. This is a repertoire theater that goes through, I don't know, dozens of operas a year. No week is the same, and they might space the ring, 3 months apart, and do these pieces of even of a cycle. So every week is different. You'll do 4 or 5. The house does 4 or 5 operas a week. And with only a few nights off. So if you're an outside artist coming into an established production that's in the house, tell us a little bit what that's like.
Well, that is insanity. That is nothing like doing a new production. It's actually gotten a little bit better, I think, in the past couple of years. But generally, if you're coming in to do a revival of Marriage Figaro, anything that's really already established, it could easily be 5 days of rehearsal and done. You come in, you get the staging very quickly. Rarely do you get a rehearsal with the orchestra beforehand. So really that opening night, you're coming out and going for it with this orchestra, the Vienna Philharmonic. From the first night, you're finding your way. It takes a lot of nerve. It takes a lot of guts for the conductor as well. The conductor is trying to figure out how they're going to conduct you through the evening with an orchestra that they haven't seen yet as well. Sometimes you've never been in your costume. They try to give maybe one stage rehearsal, a moment for you to be on the set, on stage before that opening night. It's really dependent. For me, I had to jump in for an Ariadne auf Naxos for my debut. And I think I got maybe 3 days of rehearsal for that. And so the first time I got on stage was for the premiere. And I just thought, this is my debut, here I go.
Trial by fire.
Right?
But Vienna is rather famous for that. And I know even in the orchestra, the conductor can't even count on the same musicians sometimes.
Yeah, the musicians rotate as well. So the conductor will come into the pit and see a completely different set of musicians from all the rehearsals that they did.
So it sounds haphazard, but it's full of professionals who do this in and out and have done it for many, many years. And so it's always an incredible production. And the audiences are picky. It's the Viennese know their music, so they can't get away with the slovenliness. They really have to be on target and get people like you who can just jump in there. Let's talk about preparing a role. You're going to be at the English National Opera in London next spring in the lead role of Red in a production.
Of Fred, yeah.
So you're now getting this prepared. So before you get to the production and so on, what are you doing to get into the mindset and the music of a new role like this?
Yeah, so in the spring, I'm doing an opera version of The Handmaid's Tale at English National Opera. And I'm singing Offred is what some people say too. I don't know which way to go. And this is an opera that was actually written about 20 years ago, but it was before the TV version came out. So when it emerged as an opera, unless you really were familiar with the book, it didn't really have a huge impact. Now English National Opera wants to do it again. And of course, now everyone knows the story really well. And so we're attempting this. It's a fairly modern piece, like modern music, and it is really intense. It's really intense. It's hard. It's hard music to learn, and so I'm having to be. It's not like learning Mozart. You don't sort of pick up on a tune really quickly. So I would say the work is torturous, and I say that seriously. It really is torturous for me. But it's because I'm not one of those people that, like, I'm not a sort of a modern music specialist. But it's something where you have to really, I find I really have to be disciplined about how I study in a very different way. So while I'm here, every afternoon, you know, every day I know I need to work at least for an hour and a half on the piece. I need to get through at least another scene and keep adding on. And then I go back and I test myself for the things that I've been working on over the past few days. I keep adding on layers. And it's repetition. I have to repeat. And it gets to the point with modern pieces like these that you don't ever have to worry about memorizing it, because you repeat it so much. I work on it so hard that the memorization comes really naturally, as opposed to Mozart sometimes, where I really have to focus on my memorization. But with this, you have to get it so into your muscle memory that you never have to worry about that per se. You just have to know exactly where you are at every moment. You have to count every beat. You need to know when the conductor's there. You need to know exactly where you're coming in. And it's difficult. It's rewarding. It's very hard work, but it's difficult. Right now I'm at the point, I think I always find this with pieces like this, I'm climbing the mountain, and there are moments where I'm trying to look for ways to get off the mountain rather to keep climbing, but I know I've just got to keep going. So, but I have to start early. But I think it's going to be really exciting once we finally get to rehearsals.
Do you do a lot of contemporary opera? Is this?
I do a mix. I did a world premiere here 2 seasons ago in Vienna called Orlando, and that was another really difficult piece to learn. And so I do some, but I'm careful not to overload myself with it, because it does take so much time. The way I like to prepare, I really don't like to show up and not feel that I've got a really good hold on the piece. And especially when you're the central character, you know that you have to be the anchor for everything that's happening from scene to scene, because she's in every scene. So for my mental health, I don't do, I'm pretty selective, because it takes so much time. And now I've got a child, and he's 4 years old, and so I have to balance the time that it takes from other things in life, because I spend months working on these pieces.
Well, you anticipated the next question, of course. You're also a mother and caring for a child, of course, and a family, with the family life. It's not something like you can spend 10 hours at the office. There is no such thing in that kind of lifestyle. Yeah. Of course, much of it, you talk about preparing a role and so on, involves perhaps being at home, but then of course you're in Vienna now. So how do you balance, the life-work balance is something we all talk about, but for an opera singer, it must be a rather special challenge.
It is a very special challenge. And I don't think there's any formula. I speak with a lot of my colleagues about this. Everybody has sort of a different way they work. I think a lot of it depends as well on our partners and what they do. But it's really tricky. And I'm starting during the past few years. We've had the flexibility that he could be on the road with me, and then we had the pandemic, and so I was at home a lot more. And now he'll start school next year, and so that's another consideration. Yeah. So I'm really having to look at the calendar and say, all right, how much time can I truly afford to be away? And also, I don't want to. I want to be at home. I want to be there for life at home as well. I think that's one of the results from the pandemic. Actually, is that when we were stuck at home, the truth is I didn't really miss traveling. Traveling is sort of one of those things you have to deal with in order to do your job. But I didn't miss going to a new city, having to buy my olive oil and salt and pepper and all the, starting over every single time in a new apartment.
Right.
I didn't miss that. I really enjoyed being at home. And so, yeah, it was I'm constantly sort of trying to find that balance with travel and being at home. And I think also within that, instilling sort of an appreciation for my son of what I do and what his dad does. Ollie, my husband, does documentary films. So we both are freelancers, but I'm a bit scheduled in advance. So I have to be quite mindful of the fact that I also need to leave space and time as Ollie is doing projects as well and picking up projects. So there's a lot to juggle, and I think we really have to take it sort of season by season and year by year, because it's tricky. It's tricky, but it's one of those things. I think having a child and the pandemic has made me realize it's okay to take some time to breathe every once in a while. I think for so many singers, I was talking with another singer about this a couple of months ago here. He was saying, I just was going from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. I would be on the road for most of the year. And now after the pandemic, he said, I'm starting to get anxiety attacks about all the things that I have to do. And I just had to cut out 2 things this season, and I feel so much more calm now. And I really understand that maybe we need to take a little bit more time in our lives if we can afford to take that time, to breathe. For me, it's like study. I enjoy the process of studying. And try to take that just to re-energize and sort of re-inspire ourselves.
Do you think that could be one of the surprisingly positive outcomes of the pandemic? I mean,
Yeah.
Pandemic might dissipate hopefully in the next year or two, but there will be changes. You talked about them before. Things have changed for us. That's an example, isn't it?
Yeah.
What could be different.
Yeah, I think so. I think also that a lot of artists during the pandemic, a lot of us were thinking about, well, what are some interesting projects that we would like to do that are more self-directed? And, I wasn't doing sort of video stuff a lot during the pandemic, but I did make a recording, and I was thinking along those lines and speaking with colleagues about what are some sort of self-directed things that we could do where we're using our creativity a bit more rather than being hired for an opera project. You go in, you've got the director who tells you sort of how to act, how to approach the character. You've got the conductor who says, sing it this way. Those are good in a lot of ways, but then there are times when we as singing artists, I think musicians in general, you need those experiences too, where you're more self-directed, that you're finding it on your own and you're finding it through your own voice and your own vantage point, just to balance out the experiences in which you are really sort of following more of a formula. And so I do think that's changed a little bit, that we're seeing the door opening, especially for festivals, summer festivals. People are looking for ideas.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for interesting ideas and sort of COVID safe ideas too, smaller projects. And so I think that is opening a door for people.
What about, we've also experienced through this time an increasing social awareness, inclusivity, the environment, the many things that are happening in society, not just the pandemic, of course. And the question is, what role can art play? Can the arts play in raising awareness and making an impact or a difference?
I think that's a very good point. And I think actually the arts, I think as a community, we need to, I think we are, but we need to maybe take a sort of a faster, more directed approach to that. I think things are happening in terms of inclusivity for sure. And I'm seeing that in casting very, very quickly. But I think when it comes to social, sort of, or climate change, social change, I think that it's, even with Giovanni, the story of Giovanni, our director, Barry Kosky, was saying the first day we sat down for presentation, he said, I can't tell you how many people have asked me in interviews, how can you dare to stage Don Giovanni in this day and age, with the Me Too movement and all of this. And he said he was sort of shocked by that question, because in a way, why not be doing it and exploring it now?
Yeah.
And so he was really perplexed by that, which I quite understand. But yeah, I think you make a good point that probably we need to be looking at that even more closely.
Because the arts, and they really occupy a unique position in the human experience. As I say to many of my music students, we don't feed the poor, we don't put roof over people's heads, but we are the keepers of what keeps us human. Mm-hmm. We are those who are preserving one of the true characteristics of being a human being. Mm. And there's a responsibility that comes with that.
Yeah, I think also the arts, music, art, it's a precious holder of history. It contains information about history that you can't get in other forms. And even actually that was something I really realized when I was studying here, because I was doing the art history course. And so we were going to all of the museums, and it would seem so obvious, but for a kid who came from Richmond, Virginia, who didn't have those experiences, to understand the Baroque sort of artwork all over, and you realize, oh, that looks like the music sounds. I just didn't make that connection, that everything that was happening in that period sort of complemented each other. And it puts you you just realize that the music and the art is telling you something about life during that time. And so we have to hold on to that, and we have to continue to develop that, because it's informing generations ahead.
And defining who we are even today.
Yeah.
Before we move to the questions, we began this interview by reflecting on the fact that it's been 20 years. But how do you, Kate Lindsey, get from being an undergraduate here studying at IES Vienna to your position now in the operatic and musical world? What does one have to keep in mind? Let's say you have those aspirations as a young person. The music program is still very much alive and going, as you know here, and we have 30 music students this semester. What does a young person have to really make it to that level?
I mean, I think so much of it is taking opportunities when you can get them, and that's one of the things that I sort of look back on all of it, in the whole college experience. And I think some of it comes down to luck and being in the right place at the right time. The right person hears you or sees you, and they want to take a chance on you. But I think as well, if I have trouble saying this, but if I were to give myself some credit at that time, and I had no idea exactly what I was doing, but I remember my work study job to have some spending money, I worked in the music library at IU. And so a lot of times as I'm reshelving books and everything, I'm really looking at things, putting all the magazines back, I realized, I'd look at like Classical Singer magazine, and I'd look at all of the summer opportunities. And I really did try to take advantage of summer opportunities, study abroad, audition for this, for that, just keep auditioning, keep trying for things. Any performing experience is a worthwhile experience. It's always an opportunity to grow and to learn. When I was actually one of the big influences too, after my freshman year at IU, I did a summer program in San Francisco. And the director of Marriage of Figaro, I was lucky enough to do a role in Marriage of Figaro, and the director, Michael Temmer, was a professor here at the Hochschule here. And he really encouraged me as well, come to Europe, come to Europe. So he planted that seed. And then when the opportunity came up to study here for the fall semester of my junior year, it was just obvious, you have to do this. You have to come to Europe and see what the opportunities could be. And then when I returned, it was the next year that I really had a focus, my senior year in university. I think for a lot of the students, the music students, at least for me, that came from IU, I think we returned to IU with a much clearer vision and focus about what it could be and where you could go. And for a lot of us, that made quite a difference. And so I was able to really focus in on what I was trying to do. And then I did get lucky.
There's luck, and then there's deserved luck, if I can put it that way. There is, of course, the crossing of opportunity and talent, but without the talent, there's no opportunity. So, well, I mean, there has to be both, of course. You kind of left that out, but I think that needs to be acknowledged as well as we look at all of this.
Yeah, it's, but I think there's so much of it. There's so much that I've had to figure out, vocally, everything. There's so much that I've had to work on for years and years and years. But it's so much of it is about being willing to work at it, because some things get easier as we age, but some things get harder. And so I'm always recalibrating and asking questions. And I was just talking to my colleague, the soprano in the production, and you think in a way it's going to get easier, but we were just laughing backstage this morning about the fact that that level of sort of slight insecurity never leaves you. We're always trying to better ourselves. And I think that's part of what brings us back to doing, to being a part of this.
Great. Well, with that, I have to stop my questions because I think we might have other questions, and I want to be sure that we have time for our alumni to chime in here. I think, Dawn, you have some
yeah, we've got some questions. If anyone has questions during this time, they can put them in the Q&A, and we'll answer them in order. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Morten. It was a great conversation. I've already got some questions that have come in, some that you guys already answered, which I'm sure no one realized that. One was, Kate, during your career, is there a type of role or character that has particularly attracted you or brought you greater enjoyment as a performer?
Oh, that's a good one. I'd say there's a couple. Recently, it's been Nero, the Roman emperor. I think there's been something. I played him at the Met. And then I've also played him in Monteverdi's sort of version of the story in Salzburg and also in Vienna. And so I've sort of lived with this guy for a while, and these projects came along right at the time where we're really effectively, I think, dealing with a sort of a very far right influence. And it was quite interesting to look historically as to what was happening in Roman times and how leaders operated, because I found it wasn't like a judgment on politics, but for me it was this reminder that elements of history repeat themselves in various ways. Sort of, obviously our circumstances are different, but people's desire and what for power, or what power does to someone, is really fascinating to me. And so he as a character was quite fascinating, because he sort of grew up in this privileged way, was put into a position that he didn't really want, and then and then sort of lost his mind in the meantime, but he really wanted to be an artist, actually. And so I just found him a really interesting character to explore. And so that would be sort of my, and I actually did my recording this past year, Tyranno, sort of based on Nero and the story of Nero, because he's just been somebody that I've been quite interested in. I think as I'm processing what's going on in the world, it's an interesting character exploration into one person.
Another question was, maybe you could expand more on how you've been preparing, having those actual rehearsals, with the orchestra, and how challenging is it to not rehearse with an orchestra? The challenges that have brought up.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting because we're right now we're rehearsing just with the piano in the room. And yesterday we had a full day of just music rehearsal with the maestro, Philippe Jourdain. He's the music director here at the opera. And so that work is so intense. I went home, we did a morning session yesterday. I was walking out of the Staatsoper and I couldn't stop yawning. It's such intense work. It's so detailed. I went home and I just had to sleep for half an hour to get my head back. And on Monday we start in with orchestra rehearsals, and it's really intense when we move into orchestra rehearsals. Number one, we're in Vienna and it's the Vienna Philharmonic, and that in itself is a pretty big deal. So you want to be in good form. And something that's really specific about this orchestra is that I think that it has sort of this personality in that if they start to really engage with you as a singer, then they will really start to play with you. Like they'll really accompany you. And I felt that one time when I was here singing Componist in Ariadne of Naxos, there was a moment in the opera where all of a sudden I thought, wow, they're accompanying me, like they're feeling me now and they're going with me. And it's like that moment of like, I think they accept me. And so, when you go into these orchestra rehearsals, those moments are really vital to developing that relationship, because once they move into the pit and you're far away from them, you don't have that immediate connection. So even when I do concerts, just a couple of weeks ago, I did the Mahler 3 here with another orchestra, and I made a point when we started rehearsals in the Musikverein, even though we're in the hall and I could stand out and look out into the seats, I made a real point to turn into the orchestra, because those are the only moments when you can really connect. And so they can really see what you're trying to do. And then when you turn out, that you've sort of built that connection. But the intensity really turns up when the orchestra comes.
Sounds like an adrenaline rush for sure.
Yeah.
Let's see. There's another question, I think from someone who saw you last time you were at the Met. Sheila asked, have you kept up with your side planks that you were doing since Agrippina?
Yeah, in that production in the Met, I had to sing an aria and then hold myself up in side plank for, I don't know, 20 seconds or so, singing this aria. I'm still doing some yoga, yeah, so I think I could still manage it, but thankfully I'm not being asked to do that right now. So
some directors do ask you to do it, obviously.
Yeah, some do, but right now I'm playing a woman on stage, and so I'm actually going to be in a dress and some heels. So that's a whole other catastrophe waiting to happen. It's toppling over on stage.
Let me see if there's any more questions. I don't really see any. One alum asked, have you done any teaching at all? Any music teaching, had a chance to be in front of students?
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of private teaching, but I've done some master classes. I also have gone and worked at Royal Academy of Music in London. I've done some coaching. with students there as well, sort of opera students in their opera program. But that's something that I'm sort of looking into starting to do a little bit more, because I think it's quite valuable. I've been careful about approaching it for a while, because I think people do need consistency, and that's not something I can give if I'm traveling a lot. And I think young singers especially need consistency. I think I can serve singers who have had a good foundation. I can serve them with ideas, but I wouldn't want to take on the responsibility of working with a young voice that really needs consistent care. But I think I have sort of enough experience behind me that I can offer some ideas to get people going. So I'll be doing some work this summer, a bit with that, because I do think in the future, you know, I'd like to open the door in the future to being able to teach at the university level, and I'd like to start to learn now what that, you know, what are some things that I want to research more and work on a little bit, so that I'd be ready for that potentially one day. Because it's a really different thing. Having a singing career and knowing how your voice works is completely different than sort of working with another person's musculature, instrument, another person's background. I mean, so much of producing sound with the voice, so much of it comes from a much deeper place of experience within us. And so you have to be quite sensitive to sort of where a person is, where they're coming from in their lives as well. I can sense anxiety, I can sense stuff going on. So we have to sort of find our safe place before we move into the work sometimes.
Another question, what are a few of your favorite opera houses that you have performed in? And do audiences differ with each opera house? Audiences
definitely differ. I do love singing at the Staatsoper. I like singing at Royal Opera House as well in London, because it's a really intimate theater. I like singing in theaters in Europe because the theaters tend to be just much more intimate. They are built for opera. The thing I have struggled with theaters in the States is that a lot of theaters are built to house a lot of different art forms. So sometimes the acoustic is just not as strong. And I think, sadly, I do think that can affect people's experiences with the opera as well, if they can't hear so well, things like that, that it's quite important that they're getting that full experience. I do like being at the Met, because that's where I got my start as a young artist in my early 20s. So I always like to return there. But the Staatsoper sort of has become a little bit of a home of late. I'm just working here a lot. And yeah, they're definitely different personalities. American audiences are always much more responsive. You feel where you are with them. People are not afraid to sort of have a vocal response to something going on. I remember when I was first singing in France, you know, it was like Marriage of Figaro, you know, it's supposed to be funny, you know, and I just thought, I think they hate the production. It was just utter silence the whole time, and I just thought, I don't think this is going well. And someone had to explain to me, and I realized at the end, no, they respond, but they respond at the end, and then it's quite big, and then they all move into like a coordinated clapping response as well. That's a whole thing that happens in France, where everybody sort of coordinates their claps at a certain point. And also here, I would say like the Viennese audience is fairly quiet, I would say. And so you don't know exactly where you stand until the end. But I've come to now sort of appreciate that, because I realize that they're quite focused. It's just in a different way. And it's probably reflective of our cultures, because I think Americans are much much more ready to, yeah, extroverted, and people always comment on that, you know, that Americans tend to be much more extroverted and not afraid to make a sound. And so I enjoy the change. I enjoy getting a taste of the different audiences.
Another one about the different roles that you played. What role has been, I guess, the most emotionally challenging for you in your career?
Well, I think emotionally challenging from maybe just from an experience was probably Orlando that I did 2 years ago, because it was just a very difficult experience. There was a lot of pressure involved, and you know, there's a lot riding on it. I think that honestly, right now, the most difficult thing that I'm sort of thinking about now is Handmaid's Tale, actually, because as I'm looking at it, as I'm looking at this at the story, I think it's gonna be a tough couple months emotionally, just because of the story. She's dealing with the fragments of her memory and the fragmented memories of her 5-year-old daughter. And I think I'm going to find that really hard because I have a 4-year-old son. So I think that's going to be a really hard process. I think as well, the story is in a way even more contemporary than it was when the book was written in, I think, the mid-'80s. I think it was 1985 when she wrote the book. I was just speaking with the artistic team last week, and they were talking about, it hadn't occurred to me, but they made a good point. You know, what's happened in Afghanistan is actually quite pertinent to what the story of The Handmaid's Tale as well. There are really interesting parallels as well. And I think that some of the difficulty in working on the piece is that I'm returning to that world, and I'm reading the novel sort of as I'm working on the piece, sort of putting it together. And I'm having to be quite cautious about finding a bit of space to set that aside, because I can't go to sleep at night sort of with that. I guess in essence, it's a story that actually feels quite threatening. After sort of everything we've lived, there are elements of it that don't feel so far-fetched. And so I'm trying to manage that world. So I'd say the most emotionally taxing is probably ahead of me.
I can very much see that. I can actually very much see that. I think that wraps up all the questions that we've had for today. I'm going to turn this over to Jennifer. She's got a few little announcements for alumni who are on the call today, and then we will wrap things up. So Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Wow. Well, I just cannot think of a better way to kick off the holiday season than this hour spent with you, Kate, and with Morten. Thank you so much on behalf of all the alumni and friends who were able to join us live today, and who will undoubtedly enjoy watching the recording of this conversation. It was just really wonderful. Thank you especially for that reminder that art is such a precious holder of history. I think that is something we all certainly appreciated and thought about during this last couple of years. And also, in conjunction with the holiday season, I want to remind everyone that the International Giving Tuesday is coming up on Tuesday, November 30th for us in the United States. That's that Tuesday after Thanksgiving. And as I look at the list of everybody who's attending this program, I know so many of you have generously supported IES scholarships for years and years, and we so appreciate that. We have 839 students across all of our IES programs in Europe this fall. Study abroad is back. We anticipate record enrollments in the spring. And so that also means we will have record numbers of students applying for scholarships based on financial need. So thank you in advance for including IES in your philanthropic giving this year, and wish everyone very happy holidays.